Hey, so I'm going to talk a little bit about, I'm going to talk a little bit today about the difference between knowing ourselves and relating. One thing that can often happen, depending on your upbringing, your experiences of relationships, but enmeshment can occur where how I am becomes the centre of how we are, the relating space, or how another is becomes the definition of how we are, the relating space. It's really important when we're trying to relate that we're clear about where we are. So that is a starting point. I need to know about who I am, what I need, how I feel, and how I go about getting my needs met. Completely my responsibility. Then, when it comes to the relating space, it is a shared space, so we can't solve that singularly. We can't solve that alone. We have to solve it in relation to the other person, because they have to be as much part of the solution to the space between me and them. They have to be as much part of figuring it out as we are. Often what can happen is one person can take a dominant role in a relationship, not through any bad meaning, and another person can take a passive role. And when this happens, one person takes responsibility for themselves and the relating, and sometimes even the other person. And then the passive person, what a passive person will do in that dynamic is they won't take full responsibility for themselves, very little if any for the group, for the relating space, the shared space, and no real consideration or no real input into the other's space. So there's always three parts in a relationship of two people. There's one person, the other person, and the shared space. So when we take too much responsibility, we take responsibility for ourselves, the shared space, and often a part of their well-being or their life. And when we don't take enough space, what we often do is actually withdraw and allow the other person to manage themselves, the space, and even sometimes manage a part of us. Now, this dynamic occurs again and again. It occurs in romantic relationships, professional relationships, and the challenge with that is that unless we are relating and both taking responsibility for the space between us, then the outcomes are often not satisfying to both parties, and then one party acts out. So it might be satisfying to one party to some degree, but if it's not satisfying for both parties, the relating becomes fractured. And the space between us, what we share, becomes fractured or contentious or difficult. So I suppose it's really important to, when you're looking at a relationship, to look at it from that perspective. There's me, there's you, and there's us. So me, I'm responsible for, you are responsible for you, and we're both together responsible for us, and we need to both contribute to us. Now, sometimes what can happen is that the person who takes too much responsibility can be resentful to the other person because they're taking responsibility for the us. Unfortunately, that's part of the dynamic, is that by somebody taking too much responsibility for us, there isn't room for the other person, or the other person doesn't feel the need to come in. I suppose it does relate back to codependency, but it also relates to dynamics when there's narcissism present, when there's traumas present, when there's attachment issues present. So I suppose for me it's a very simple dynamic. It's simple in theory, I didn't mean it's simple in action. There's me, there's you, and there's us. I'm responsible for me, I'm responsible for aspects of us, and you're responsible for you. If we can use that framework to kind of guide us through how to solve problems, it becomes much easier to be in our own space and share it with others. If we've had a challenge with being enmeshed or being overridden or being dismissed by others, it can get very confusing for us because we don't actually know what's ours, what's theirs, and what do we share. So I think that this very simple framework or model can be really helpful in just basic clarity, at least so that you have something that's structured to work with, and then from there it's much easier to decide where it belongs. Is this mine, is this yours, or is this ours? So I hope that was helpful. You know, relating is one of the most difficult things we'll ever do. It's also one of the most rewarding things and one of the most primal things we need to do. We all want to feel like we belong. We need to feel like we belong, but we don't always have the skills to go about that in effective or healthy ways, and that's simply because we haven't learnt them, or because we have defences that don't allow us to be vulnerable like that. So I think this framework you can kind of use regardless of where you are. It can start to bring clarity to how you're relating to others, and clarity to how you're entering into relationships. So hopefully that was helpful, and you can check out my website. There's links below.